It is important for a woman to have a profession that will put money in her bank. For my father to send me to an IIT Mumbai, a 19-year-old unmarried girl out of the house to live in a hostel, it was like a big battle at home. I went through the interview and they asked me, what is the guarantee you will not get married and leave this job?
Get out.
I was upset. I left and I said, I'll never come back.
Hey you guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I have one of my dearest friends and co-conspirators, and we've done many things together. I've known her for over 10 years, 11 years to be exact. And she is an icon of the community and has done some spectacular things. Today I want to turn the tables though, because she's normally the Sutradhar who's interviewing all of us on the Ink stage and other stages. And she is a storyteller as well as a interviewer supreme. And so we want to welcome her to the channel. So please give a round of applause to Lakshmi Pratury. Lakshmi, thank you so much for joining us on the channel. It's an absolute pleasure seeing you. I'm so glad you could make it here.
Yes.
You're like a woman of the world these days, as I know. You're living in like 2 or 3 different continents, and
Yes.
you're doing so many things. Today I want to kind of get to the real Lakshmi, because we
Yes.
always see you on stage interviewing other people, teasing out the details. And I want to kind of get your story, and I want to hear a little bit about what's going on. So, you know, I've heard a lot of the different things about you. You grew up in India. Where exactly did you grow up?
I was born in Visakhapatnam, and then we moved to Hyderabad when I was 3 months old.
Okay.
So my entire upbringing through my undergrad was in Hyderabad.
So you've seen Hyderabad change. I've seen
Oh,
it
a
change.
lot. I mean, to the point I don't even recognize it anymore. Certain part like Gachibowli, high-tech city, I really am totally lost when I go there.
She and I spoke at Facebook headquarters. My God, how the city has gone from one end to another. I think that's the India story.
Yeah, it is. It
Right?
really is. And I still remember people saying, oh, you should buy some land in high-tech city. And I'm like, no, I should have listened to them.
I think all of us should have listened to him, because had we bought back in the day there and anywhere else in India, we would have come out ahead. And I think even in the future, it'll happen. So from Hyderabad, you migrated to Bangalore.
No, actually from
you stayed in
Hyderabad. I was in Hyderabad till I finished my undergraduate. I did my undergrad in mathematics.
Okay.
Then I went to IIT Mumbai to pursue my master's and hoping my PhD in mathematics.
So this was an interesting story, actually, and one which has some learnings. You studied in Hyderabad in an IIT, or what sort of college?
No, in Hyderabad I studied in Nizam College. So that was the only college that gave a pure mathematics combination.
And what was your focus?
So it was mathematics, applied mathematics, statistics.
Wow.
So it was
that's
pure math.
hardcore stuff.
Yeah, pure math. Because I didn't want to do chemistry.
Okay.
So, but I loved physics, but didn't want chemistry.
So it's
and
either
I wanted
science,
math.
or it was commerce, or it was other fields.
Other fields. So this was the only college actually that had a pure math combination. So I took that, and
what inspired you to do that?
you know, growing up, it's either you become a doctor or an engineer. My father was a doctor, so naturally I didn't want to be a doctor. And and also my second sister was a doctor, and she like grilled in me that, if you study medicine, you'll be studying forever, so don't do medicine.
Wow.
So in fact, my entire life is defined by what I didn't want to do. It's not what I wanted to do.
But had you studied any medicine, or?
No. I studied
just from
biology till
seeing.
10th grade. And I was so afraid my dad was going to push me into medicine that I took mathematics in intermediate. Didn't even want to take biology.
And not a simple thing back then, because in India, math is a different math.
Yeah.
You're learning not only rote, but also questions and questions and questions.
And you know, this is actually my travel through mathematics is a good example of what teaching can do. You know, till my 8th grade, I almost was failing in mathematics. There were like 35 is a passing grade. So there were times I got 35, 36. And in 9th grade, I had Augustine teacher who was like a phenomenal math teacher.
And he inspired you.
She.
Better
Augustine
yet.
teacher, yeah. I went to a girls' school.
Oh, got it.
And it was, to me, it was like if I got anything less than 100, I was upset. You know, like she inspired me so much. And I started like loving mathematics.
So you know, the funny thing with my older son, it was the same way.
Yeah.
And we had moved his school, and he was having a hard time adapting. And then there was one teacher, Margaret Patterson, who took him under his wing, inspired him, and the same thing happened.
Yeah.
And your point is well taken,
Yeah.
that sometimes the teachers that you have
Yeah.
change the whole road you've been on
Right.
both ways.
Yeah. And
Both
to me, it
ways.
was always alternate. So 9th and 10th, I did very well in mathematics. So I took math, physics, chemistry. In 11th and 12th, I had terrible teachers. And
I've heard this in a lot of places that they don't really teach. They teach for exams. So most of the students bunk their class and
Yeah.
then go and study.
see, there is
in the
one
things.
thing of in 11th and 12th, it's called intermediate in Hyderabad. So you go to a college. For the first time you left
Junior
high school.
college, right?
Junior college.
Ah.
So you have all this freedom. So we would bunk half the classes and go to movies. I mean, this newfound
No, but
freedom.
they bunk
Yeah.
it because they know the only thing that matters is the exam.
That and also just that freedom to be
freedom.
able to bunk.
I think everyone did it to some degree when they
So,
went to college.
did that. But the point was, we never had consistent teachers. The teacher was on off half the time. And so in intermediate, when I graduated, there were 10 of us in math, physics, chemistry combination. Not a single one got a first class, which is first class is 60%. That's it.
Wow.
Not a single first class. So my dad went to war with my principal saying, it's okay if my daughter didn't get a first class. How can no one in mathematics
Yeah.
get first class?
Is that because the
where
curve
people in
was
biology
bad?
got first class?
The curve was bad, or no one really wanted
Nobody
to do
really
it?
knew what, I mean, half the syllabus was not covered. And so it was not a very good situation. But anyway, so till 10th it's great, 11th, 12th it's not good. Then undergrad, I go to pure math in Nizam College. And we had like the most
Great teachers.
amazing teachers. I mean, Bhimsen sir, Chari sir, oh my God, they were so
And
good.
they clearly made a difference.
I
in
mean,
your
it
life.
was, I was not, I was like university first in mathematics. I mean, it like from not even getting first class in my junior college in 3 years to top the university is like,
Did it surprise you?
in
knew you had it in
retrospect,
you.
in retrospect, it surprises me. But at that time, I never thought about, I mean, when 12th happened, I was devastated. But when undergrad happened, it wasn't like I was surprised. Like it was, all of us were in it and we were competing with each other.
I mean, this is a theme for later
Yeah.
with your son,
yeah,
who has interesting gifts.
correct.
And I think you're already seeing it in yourself in that you didn't know,
Right.
but when you fell into the right circumstance, everything became clear.
And also what happens is that I happened to be good at math through undergrad. But the minute I went to IIT Bombay, first of all, here at the top of my university here,
big
I
fish.
go there and I'm like bottom of
Bottom
the class.
fish, or a small fish
I mean,
in a big
I
pool.
was like by far behind most of the people in the
I
class.
mean, look, let's
Yeah.
call it what it is. Getting into IIT is a privilege and
Yeah.
a very, very hard standard.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that it's revered.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you've seen all the movies,
Right.
and Three Idiots, this, that, and the other, and they push you so hard. And
Yeah.
some of it is jugadu on how to take tests.
No, and also it's that I think there are too many things happen. You leave home for the first time. You're going someplace new.
Was
You're
that the first time you
That
were
was
out?
first time because I
So you were at home in Nizam.
Yeah, Nizam College. I was at home.
Okay.
And it was like a big battle at home for me to, as a 19-year-old, to leave home and go
And
somewhere
were your
else.
parents okay with that?
My father and sisters were like, we never want to stand in your way of success.
Wow.
But my extended family, my aunts, everyone was so much against
Is
it.
this a common South
Very
Indian
common.
trait?
I mean, not just South
Or
Indian.
just
In those
Indian?
days when we were growing up, girls didn't leave unless they got
Ah,
married.
that's what I was asking.
So for my father to send me to an IIT Mumbai, a 19-year-old unmarried girl out of the house to live in a hostel,
Amazing.
in that too big bad Bombay,
And
right?
this was co-ed, not just girls.
Right. I mean, in my undergrad, Nizam's was co-ed, so I crossed that barrier.
Okay.
But to go to another city, and my dad told me that I never want you to feel I stood in your way of success. So,
And so I
yeah.
understand some of it because he's educated, he's
Yeah.
gone through it.
I mean, he was a doctor, he studied in
and so-
US and
also
came back.
South. But
Yeah.
even the South can be fairly conservative.
It's conservative in terms of sending your daughter somewhere else. Studying. If I was
Studying
there,
would have been there.
yeah. If I was in there and I was studying math, physics, whatever, it's okay. But to leave home and go somewhere and stay in a hostel was just not
you
okay.
went to IIT.
I went to IIT, but I realized, first of all, I wasn't as good as everybody else. And then the system in IIT pitted against each other. But the most important thing is that I realized I'm really not in love with mathematics. I did it till then because I was good at it. I figured out the system.
That's a teacher effect?
It is a teacher effect, but if you really love something at that master's level, you'll overcome it, I think. But I think it's all these things of going away from home, being there for the first time, having to do all your things. I never knew how to wash my clothes or anything.
Multivariable equation in your language.
And then being behind everybody else in the class. And what happens is when you don't know something, you don't want to say, I don't know. Yeah. And you don't understand the first day, second day, and then that's it. If you do not ask and clarify the first fundamentals, you always left behind. So, and then it's like a domino effect. You can never catch up. You're like always gasping for air.
I mean, you're very humble because I've seen you operate and I can tell you're one of the smartest people I know. I think the real trick of it is when you're in a pool of really smart people, how do you define yourself? And
correct.
A lot of the insecurities and imposter syndrome, which go with that for all of us.
Right.
I mean, I'm sure you know, but Maya Angelou, Einstein, all of these guys had imposter syndrome. Yeah. And yet they were gifted people. And all you needed was one guide who believed in you. Guide, I'm saying, male, female, doesn't matter, parent, whatever. And most of us, ultimately found that, and I think you did later.
I think for me, the biggest eye-opener was that everybody is not meant to do everything. My father came.
How old were you when you discovered that?
I was 20 at that time. So my father came and I was like crying all the time. And I was like, I grew up, I was always like this happy-go-lucky person, funny. My dad said, I've never seen you cry so much in your life. This is not the place for you. I don't care if it is IIT or whatever, you come back home.
Wow.
And he said, you have the freedom not to do this because this is obviously not what you love. I think what I realized there is that to be a great mathematician, actually, you need to love abstraction. You need to love real like there's real numbers and all that kind of, it's almost like philosophy.
So you're almost talking theoretical, not applied.
Actually, you're right. You're right. If I was in more statistics or something, it's different.
Because if it's applied nowadays, everyone's going into analytical mathematics so they can bridge over to AI and to computer science, right?
Because at that time there were three. There was computer science, statistics, and pure math. Yeah. But you had the best people went to computer science, next went to statistics, and the rest were in math. And I wasn't good enough to go to the other two. Wow. But I wasn't good enough to do this. And when I saw people who were doing PhD, I thought, I don't love mathematics so much. But I didn't know what else to do.
You didn't have exposure.
Because I fought with everyone at home, came to IIT, and like, Izzat ka sawal now, so how can you go back to Hyderabad? But my dad was like, doesn't matter, we love you anyway, come back. But all my classmates would be my seniors now if I went back. Wow. So I was like, I don't want to go back. But I didn't know what to do. So then I started asking people, what do people do after IIT? And they said they do something called MBA. I said, what is an MBA? It's a business administration.
What year was this?
This was 1980.
Okay. And so an MBA in 1980 was a very different phenomenon in India.
And also coming from the South, from my family, where everyone is either a doctor or an engineer.
Being a
consultant. And business was always seen like this bad, making money was bad.
So I can relate to that,
right?
100%.
Business people are bad. Like we never knew any business person.
This is why we get along, because we grew up that way.
So everybody was like a teacher or a doctor or a nurse. I've never known anybody who's in business per se.
A respected profession. Yeah. Whereas in business, they thought they were just money-hungry kind of people
and
going
it's
after the wrong
such a
thing.
Misnomer. Then I said, to get out of IIT, I should get into some school that people after IIT would want to go. Then again, my pride will be saved. So I said, what does one do? So you got to give some entrance exam. Which are the best schools? IIMs, there were 3 IIMs and Bajaj. I said, where do we give the entrance exam? Last day for IIMs is over, only Bajaj is left. So I just gave the exam. I had no idea what it was.
That was the GRE or?
Yeah, it was equivalent of it. They have like this entrance exam. And then they said, there's a group discussion. I said, what's that? They said, you're in a room and you have to talk about a subject. I said, that I can do. I mean, I got into Bajaj, not knowing what an MBA was.
Wow.
I just wanted to
And
get out of
where is
IIT.
Bajaj, in Mumbai?
In Mumbai.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay.
So I was like, I wanted to stay in Mumbai, but I didn't want to study mathematics. I didn't want to go back home. So I did this. Then I wrote to my dad and said, now I'm quitting IIT. I want to go to Bajaj. And my dad was like, what is that? Business. What is this business degree? Then he had to call all his patients. My dad was a pediatrician. Call his patient. Somebody was a businessman and say, there's something MBA she's saying. Is this okay? Is this an okay institute? I mean, they had no idea what it
Bajaj is
was.
well reputed.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the best schools.
100%.
But none of us knew about it. So he was like, I don't know, you get me into all trouble. Now what is this? At least there you were in a hostel. Now where will you stay?
And this is 1980.
1981 by then, yeah.
1981.
Yeah.
And you are in the middle of India. And tell me about India back then.
Yeah.
I remember the emergency had happened in what,
Yes,
77,
77, 78.
right?
So I was in India at that time. And my father was a congressman. He's a freedom fighter and all that stuff.
Wow.
So all the election activity would happen in our house. And I was a big fan of Indira Gandhi. I mean, big. And my dad took me to meet her and all that stuff. But when emergency happened, it was
Everything
like
changed.
heartbroken. I was
Yeah.
so heartbroken,
Yeah.
So I think my generation went through a lot of confusion because we were all 15, 16 at that time.
And also the business place was changing. They
Yeah.
had thrown off the British Raj.
Yeah.
And they were just finding themselves.
Right.
In the 80s was
Because Garibi
very
Hatao,
different. Yeah.
it was very socialistic.
Yes,
We wanted to make a
yes.
difference.
There was no capitalism back
Yeah,
then.
not at all.
So in
And
that
that's why an MBA
context-
was, what is that? What is a
Yes.
business?
Yes, very interesting.
Yeah. And
So what did you think you would do with that?
I had no idea. I'm like, at
You
any
just wanted to
given
study
point
something
of
to
time.
save face.
Yeah, that's
But
it.
in truth, I mean, you were like, this makes sense.
Yeah, I had no idea what it was. I have to get out of this. My life is again always defined by how do I leave this, not where do I want to go. I never had a 5-year vision, 10-year vision. Even now, I don't have that. I only look
And
at
you were
what I'm
barely
doing now.
2021 back then.
I was 20 at that time.
Man, oh man.
So I was not quite 20. And then I was like, okay, I got to leave this. I went to Bajaj.
And what was Mumbai like, just to ask you?
Oh, it was,
There's nothing
to me,
here. I mean, it was all
In
Dadar and
fact,
South Bombay.
I got into IIT because I loved Mumbai. I came here for a holiday. I fell in love and I said, in love with the city. And then I said, how do I live here? And I said, the only way they'll send me if I get into a very good institute.
Yeah.
So my classmate was giving an IIT exam. So I told my dad, I also want to give an IIT exam just to go to Bombay. I was not
Okay.
interested in IIT at all. So it was like he wouldn't say no to me to go give an entrance exam. So I gave an exam. I was like, who's going to get into IIT? I just wanted a holiday in Bombay, that's all. So we came, wrote the exam. We were all going all over the place. On the last day, we were going back and my friend said, should we go check if our name is on the list? I was like, why do you want to waste your time? We are not going to get into IIT. He said, no, let's just go. I still remember we got off in Vikhroli and we walked up the hill. We went to IIT and I saw that I couldn't believe my name was there because the next day was the last day to pay the fee because we didn't bother checking the list till then. And then I was like, oh my God, my name is there and tomorrow
what were
is the
the
last
fees
day.
back then?
It was like 300 rupees
That's
or 400 rupees or
crazy.
something very, but it was a
Nominal.
lot of money at that time. And so I was like, what do? I call my dad and I say, I got into this IIT. And he was like, what does that mean? I said, I have to pay this fee, And they're like, it's a lot of money. Like, we have to think about it. I said, no, tomorrow is the last day. So he said, okay, I'll make arrangement for my cousin here to give the money. You just come home and then we'll see what we can do. So everything happened
Quickly.
completely. I just wanted to go to Bombay to have a good time and to write this exam. And write this exam as an excuse, actually. Now it's like, I want to move to Bombay. Now I was like set.
And then later it translated to, I want to stay in Bombay.
Yeah, then I want to stay in, because
And
it's
then
not even
Bajaj
I
came
want to
in.
stay in Bombay. I don't want to go back to Hyderabad with a, with a loss of pride. So, and I think then I fell into, by the time I went to Bajaj, for the first time I went to school where I didn't care about grades. I was just learning, which subject I liked, which subject I didn't like. And my classmates were great. But I felt like there were 6 girls and 40 guys, something like that, which I'm used to in IIT also. That didn't bother me. But the thing is, everybody felt they were all so smooth. They very well read. They spoke English so well. They were all very polished, but they were all like people from St. Stephen's and Xavier's and very polished people who knew political science, who knew all these things. And for me, it was a little, daunting, but I've learned never to show if I'm afraid. I'll just walk as though I know everything, whereas I was very nervous.
So you studied, you got your MBA. It takes what, 3 years here?
2 years.
2 years.
Yeah.
What next?
So again, that was defined by, I wanted to stay here. I wanted to join this bank. Yeah, I wanted to join this bank because they're free apartments in Cuff Parade. They put people. So I went to some parties there. I'm like, this is a job I want because you got a very cool apartment
So
there.
you're like a party girl.
Yeah.
Like that.
And so to be able to live in an apartment with roommates, this, ocean facing, not Cuff
And
Parade,
which
somewhere
bank
else.
was this?
This was Grindlace Bank, which no longer exists.
Interesting.
But what happened was I went through the interview 3-4 rounds, and the final round, I was sitting across from two people, and everything. It was pretty much like, this is the last one, you're going to get the job. And they asked me, what is the guarantee you will not get married and leave this job?
Get out.
And I was 21, full of fire. I mean, I was upset beyond belief.
That's like an awkward question nowadays.
I like got up,
then,
I pushed my chair back, I walked out of the room.
Yeah.
And I went home, I took a train, went home and told my dad, I'm leaving India. I don't want to live here. I'm just tired.
And what year was this, 83?
83. And I said, I'm tired of, by then, all along in school also, people would say, you talk too much, you laugh too loud, you sit like this, you sit like that, all these things. And my dad said, don't care about what people say. So I was okay. But this was the last straw for me. I said, I don't want to live in this country.
I mean, nowadays you would have a harassment claim against you.
Yeah.
And it's not an appropriate question to ask because if you have a good person,
there's an assumption, right? Then I asked them, I said, do you ask the guys the same question?
Wow.
And they did, and I didn't even hear the answer. I was so angry. I mean, I should have been a little cooler, I guess, and whatever. I was so angry. I went.
You said, I don't need your Cuff Parade
I took
apartment.
Nothing. I took
I'm
the
leaving.
night train, went back home, and I said, I'm leaving the country. I left the country, and I said, I'll never come back to India. Wow. That was like in 1983, I left.
And did you know people in the US back then?
I mean, it's a long story, but yes, I knew some people. And
people you went to school with who migrated?
And people I went to school with. I went with people I went to school with. But
so then how did you get to the US?
So I went to school. I thought I'll do my PhD. So I went there, and like 2 months into PhD, realized, oh my God, if I do PhD, I have to teach, which I didn't want to do. So I decided I'll do a second MBA, because if I want to live in America, I better learn how business works here. So I got a full scholarship at Portland State University, because in those days, getting a scholarship for an MBA was very difficult. If you did MS in computer science, you could get scholarship,
okay, got
but
it.
not for business.
Interesting.
But Portland State gave me a full scholarship, so I went there. And that's it. That's when I think really my life began.
And what happened next? You finished your MBA.
I finished my MBA, I think, but what happened, for the first time I understood in a university, you've experienced this, but I haven't, is you can take any course you want. And to me, it was like, wow.
Yeah, so this is something very interesting. The British norm is at 16 you decide, and I was born in London, but grew up in the US, and the schooling in London and in the UK, you choose one of those tracks, and that's what India is based on.
Correct.
And the sad part about it, which I think is a problem, is oftentimes the parents choose for the kids, number one. And number two, you look at what gives you affluence,
right,
and what gives you a guaranteed shot at a life. And
which is all fair.
Is all fair. I agree with that. And even my parents were like that. But the problem is at 16, who knows? Who knows that they want to be science track, commerce track, or law track? Who knows?
My dad sat me down and said, it is important for a woman to have a profession that will put money in her bank. You have to be economically independent. So you're good at math, you do something where you can get a job that will make you economically sustainable. So rule in our house was, you cannot get married till you get your master's.
Wow.
You have to be economically independent and never depend on someone for your for your money.
100%.
The eye-opening thing for me was that you learn a lot about your subject by studying something else. So I was doing an MBA and I did a minor in theater arts because in India, everybody wants to be an actor, right? It's like, it's never ever.
From where to where?
Yeah.
I'm like, what?
So I was
what
like,
is
I'll take
going
acting
on?
classes. So my boss would say, and I was working also, part-time. And my boss would say,
Now, what did your dad think? You're taking theater arts.
It doesn't, I'm doing my MBA. I'm getting good grades there. That's all
So
matters.
my parents were the same way. As long as you study, you
Yeah,
can do whatever
you're getting
you want.
good grades, it's okay. And my dad thought it was really cool. Like I would write like this 10-page letters, 15-page letters of what they taught me in theater class. And it was such an, learning for me. And so I learned more about doing business from my theater classes, actually, how it's all about
I think
the other
in
person.
A boardroom,
Yeah.
listening, watching visual cues. Like with my wife, they do, I think it's Abhiman or whatever in Kathak dancing, where they speak with their expressions.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
And as a result of that, in a boardroom,
Abhinaya.
So she is deadly in a boardroom because she's just watching people and
Correct.
seeing their body language. And in theater, it's the same thing, that you're visually expressing yourself as well as with your voice.
Yeah.
Right?
And the other thing you learn there is how many people it takes to produce a play.
What happened next?
So when I finished, while I was doing my MBA, like most people who live in America, you're like, how do I get my green card? How do I work? So I was sitting next to someone and they said, oh, I know someone who just started a company. Do you want to go talk to them? I was like, yeah, sure. I had, again, no idea what it was. So I went to talk to this person named Scott Ryder. Lattice Semiconductors, a semiconductor company. I don't know anything about technology companies. So I went and I talked to him, and then he said, do you know Excel? I was like, yes. Because that's when computers started coming, and 100%. I was one of the few people.
What year was this?
This was 84, 85, something like
Microsoft
that. 85, about 85.
Office was
we had
just
the
coming
first,
in.
no, not even that.
The personal computers were just coming.
No, this was, you're talking VisiCalc,
yeah.
WordStar,
WordPerfect.
So, yes, WordPerfect hasn't even come. It was WordStar and VisiCalc, that's it. And so we had a computer lab, and again, I was looking for jobs, and that's when you get paid the most. So I worked in the computer lab, and I used to teach there. So, so I was very good at, now like it's nothing. But basically in, Excel, you can do macros and all that kinds of stuff. So I went and talked to this guy's finance. I said, in my MBA, the only class I almost flunked was finance. So I'm not good at finance. He was like, doesn't matter. Do you know how to program in Excel? I said, yeah. He said, I'll teach you finance. You just come do this. That was it. And he said, okay, you have a job. And I was like, but then I explained to him, will you sponsor me for a green card? He was like, what does that mean? I said, blah, blah, blah. I said, don't worry about it.
How big was the company?
It was a startup with like 50, not even 50 people, 30, 40 people. And I said, don't worry about it.
I mean,
no, I was like, this guy doesn't know anything about it, so I should make it as simple as possible. I said, I have a lawyer. You just need to give a letter. That's all. I'll handle everything. So I went to the lawyer and I said, you submit the papers. He'll just sign and you file for green card. But this was like in Portland, Oregon, where there's hardly any big line. And there were multiple things that were going on in my life. Let's not go into it. But we applied it. And then about a year later, I got a green card. But also, the company wasn't doing well. It went into bankruptcy. And it was a LIFO, like last in, first out. So all the young people who they hired. So one day my boss took me into the room and said, I have something to talk. I was like, okay. And she said, I'm so sorry, we have to give pink slips. I didn't understand what a pink slip was. So I was like, yeah, but what's the big deal about a pink slip? Is it like a message you want me to give somebody or whatever? And she's like, this means we are letting you go. So I'm like, letting me go where? I mean, it just like took me a while to, and she was like, Lakshmi, I'm so sorry, but we have to, fire like a bunch of people. I'm like, what? I mean, this company was like my life. It was a startup, my first job, my first love. This company was, I lived there from 7 in the morning till 9 at night. And I couldn't believe it. And there was 3 of us, Roberta, myself, and another guy, Matt, all of us young people who were hired in the last year. We went out, and I still remember sitting on the sidewalk outside the place, just completely shocked. We were like, didn't know what happened. But the thing was, my father just came to spend 3 months with me.
Oh, darn.
The day before I had the pink slip.
Or?
It was terrible. I didn't, how do I tell my dad I don't have a job? So every morning I would get dressed as I was going to work and go. I didn't tell him for
This is movie material here.
Like for more than 2 weeks, I didn't tell him I didn't have a job. So I would go every day. We would stand in this unemployment line. We would, in this newspaper, circle jobs, call them, go to interviews. Finally, I had to tell him but as soon as he came, he needed clothes.
See, if you were to become a doctor, you always would have had a job.
No, my father never, one thing he never said, I told you so. So, but imagine for a father who comes from India to spend time with his daughter for 3 months, and he finds out she has no job.
But your dad honestly seems different, even when you didn't have a really good time at the MBA or at IIT.
Yeah.
He was okay with you leaving.
Yeah. And then I kept applying for jobs, and finally I got into Intel. So
this is like a Steve Jobs story.
Yeah.
Right? Where he didn't know where his next meal was coming from.
Yeah.
Next thing you know.
And actually, I must say this. So when I lost my job, first of all, now you have a car, you have a mortgage. I didn't have any mortgage.
You have bills.
I had to bills and all that stuff, and no income. So one of my friends, again from Portland State, she said, I live in a big house, and there is a little in-law quarter next door, come stay there, so you don't need to pay any rent. So I went there. And my friend Mike was working in a deli. He said, every evening you come there, I'll give you all the soups and stuff.
I think the culture in Portland was different too. It was kind of a West Coast.
Yeah, and they were like, it's okay, things happen, but let's help each other out. And I tell you, this is the funny thing I tell people when I went there. See, you grow up in India where everybody's like, oh, you're a little dark. If you're a little fair, it would have been better. So I go to Portland, which is 92% white population, and they're all like, you have such beautiful tan, So I'm like, I've died and gone to heaven.
They don't
yeah,
have,
exactly.
Right?
So I'm like, I'm at the right place at the right time,
Nice.
To be this dark and being in
Although
Portland.
I don't know now in that part of the world that is necessarily.
I mean, it's interesting. Indians are always
they're fine.
Treated all right, somehow there was, even then in the 80s, there was this curiosity about Indians. There wasn't an opinion that was already made.
So this is an interesting point, that the first generation of immigrants that came in, Indian immigrants, were all well educated. And it was almost a sieve, a filter, right? Then I'm told that they started bringing in siblings and other people who weren't as well trained. And then it started growing. We now are, 3% of the population in the US?
Something that's huge.
When you look at certain professions, whether it's college or other things, we're not underrepresented. And therefore, for us, trying to get into stuff is very, very hard.
Yeah.
Because we don't have the benefits of being blue bloods or anything like that. We're immigrants. But at the same time, we don't have the money to just buy our way in or do anything like that.
Yeah.
And so that's now versus then, because I went to school around the same time. I did college in '85, and it's very competitive. And back then, affirmative action was alive and well, and we weren't part of it. And so we had to compete against everyone.
Yeah.
But I would agree with you that the Indians were well represented.
Yeah, and also this is the one thing I loved about being in America, is that you're never too old to try anything. I mean, in Portland, I never ran in my life. I ran a marathon. People trained with me. Nobody said, oh, you're already 25. What are you doing learning now? And, I think
that culture in Portland was very different. I mean,
very
it's where
different.
Nike was
yes.
formed.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
It was a little more,
yeah,
adventurous.
Yeah, and it's like, I don't know how to swim, but I would go whitewater rafting, and people would say, it's okay, we'll figure it out. And I went mountain climbing. I don't even know how to climb. So there were these programs, people would take you, go hiking every week.
And I'm sure that defined you later.
Absolutely. See, the thing I learned there is that, to be good in anything, you need a team. Like for me, to be able to run the marathon, I had Leroy, this guy who would come run with me at 5 a.m. every day. My friend Steve, he ran
So you
5-minute
ran a
miles.
marathon?
Yeah.
All 26 miles?
All 26 miles.
Crazy.
I couldn't even run a kilometer before
I've not
that.
ridden. I ran cross country and track.
Yeah.
And long distance, like 3 miles at a time, but I never did 26.
I mean, I was like completely not athletic. Even now, I'm not athletic at all. But all these people training with you, I mean, my roommate would go all day cross-country skiing and come home and go for a 5K run for relaxation.
I'll tell you, for my wife, it was the same way growing up in India.
Yeah.
Maybe particularly for girls, but even for guys, there weren't these sports aficionados. There weren't people who championed that. Only now with the Olympics and all that, you're seeing some of that. And with cricket and with some of the other things. But back when we got married, I took her and did all of these scuba diving, this, that, mountain biking, all that. And her mind opened, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that part
and also
of the Western
it's because she
culture is
was away
positive.
from here at a place
Yeah, she
where
had
you're not
anonymity.
judged,
Yes,
right? Because
yes.
here, a 25-year-old starts learning how to ride a bicycle or a run, they'll be like, what's wrong with her?
Yeah.
It's sort of, but there
Let
was no
alone
judgment.
You can't really ride.
Yeah.
The roads are not like conducive to that.
But there was no judgment. There was nothing like you're too old, and anything was okay.
I think you also have discretionary time.
Yeah. And also here, because you grew up here, you feel you're watched all the time. I was always Dr. Thirumal Rao's daughter. So you have to always behave in a certain thing. You go to Portland, nobody knows who you are, right? So it gives you
wild.
so much
So
freedom
Lakshmi the
to be
wild child in
absolutely.
Portland, is it?
I mean, my first 7 years in Portland were, I'm not Indian. I cut my hair off. I had like punk haircut. I was always
Can't even
known as
imagine. I would love to see one of those pictures.
I was
We
known
should get
as
one of those for the channel. How many of you out there want to see Lakshmi in a punk haircut?
I don't even have any pictures. I like short haircut. I used to wear a diamond in my nose.
Wow.
And no Indian clothes, no Indian music, no Indian food. So I felt in Portland, I really found myself. There was nobody judging me, nobody looking at me. So I could do whatever I wanted. So one whole year I river rafted. One whole year I climbed mountains. One whole year I ran.
And you got away with it.
Yeah, and I was never
No
the
one's
top of
gonna
the.
say anything.
And I was never first. When I did the marathon, there was it's a huge marathon. There were like still maybe only 100 people behind me. So I was like, I took almost 4.5 hours.
That's the
to
part
run.
that people in India don't get. That you don't have to compete for everything. In India, you end up competing just to get on a train.
And also you feel if I'm not number one in this, I shouldn't do it. So if my marathon timing is not fantastic, I shouldn't do it. What you ran 26 miles, so be happy,
Who does
that? Thing
right?
was, and that's what I learned there is
Run, walk, crawl.
But
You
I
don't
must
have
say,
that.
in those days, there is some reason for it because only one person got in out of 10,000.
Yeah.
So if you are not the top,
No,
you
I
don't
appreciate
have any.
why it happens.
Yeah.
I think what I'm saying is, isn't there a better way?
And today, see, that was a shortage mindset. There was a shortage. But today there's abundance. If not this job, you'll get something else. So you don't need to have the same
But I don't know
mindset
that
today.
all the parents appreciate that.
But I must say though, when you
better.
become a parent, you become exactly your parent.
Yeah.
Like I wanted to study something MBA and my dad was like, oh, whatever, but he let me. Similarly, when my son said, I don't want to study computer science, I want to pursue football.
So we're gonna
like,
pursue that
so
line
the thing
of
is,
inquiry.
we are all flawed. We forget what we went
It's
through.
all you know, though.
Yeah.
And even with my kids, and so I said it in one of my posts. I said that my kids teach me every day.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I'm an idiot because the bottom line is half the time they get it.
Yeah.
Yesterday or today, my team was asking me Gen Z slang. And it was embarrassing. I knew like 1 out of 15 or 20, and I made it up.
Yeah.
And everyone was laughing at me. I'm okay with that.
So I got in that. I have to tell the other day somebody wrote something saying travel equals to, and it said less than 3. I said, what is less than 3? And he says, that's the emoji for heart on the side. And I was like, I'm a math person, right? The thing I see is less than 3.
Yeah, right.
And they're like, what is less than 3? And he started laughing. He said, oh my God, I don't even look at it as less than 3. That's the emoji for heart.
Well, even
And I was like,
when they start writing,
right.
there's a whole nother grammatical sense.
Yeah.
Like one of my Gen Zs in my office started writing me something, and it wasn't like, I thought broken English. I'm like, didn't this girl go to like college and all of this stuff? And she's saying you with just a U, and there's like a T, and there's no like complete sentences, and there's a dot and an exclamation. I'm like, wait a second now, I don't understand this. And I was looking at it.
But I'm communicating with the least amount of letters. Did you get it? That's all that matters. I mean, that's the attitude, right? But I'm just saying that
I think it's all built for the grammar Twitter, right?
Yeah.
So that you can get the message.
I mean, now we have ChatGPT, Grammarly, Twitter. Started with spell
my
check.
team in the background is laughing here because I totally get what we're saying.
So we started with spell check, right? I was like, in Microsoft Word when spell check came, I'm like, wow, there's a spell check.
Yeah.
And now it's like, my son knows how to put his thoughts somewhere, get an answer that sounds better than the way he wrote, and then send it to some other service that will make sure it's not plagiarized somewhere, and then run it through a third service that makes it sound like him. And I'm like, you're putting all this effort, why don't you learn how to write?
Generative AI or?
Yeah, the world has changed so much. And what I realize is that I'm looking at this world with the old lens again.
Yeah.
So I have to just say, this is a more visual world. This is a very different world. So for them, the written word is not like the way it was for us.
Yeah.
So we have to accept this and say, I mean, to me, I have a library full of books. And
100% agree. And I don't think it's better or worse. It's just different.
It's just different. You have to accept it.
There's beauty in both systems.
Yeah.
Let's come back to this Intel thing.
Right. Yeah.
What happened there?
So then I went to Intel and in finance. And
in finance.
So
your favorite.
Because they were, that was my experience. So that's where I got the job. And I was like, and I would do all these things, and my boss would say, we have to cut the budgets by 20%. I'm like, you can't just cut everybody's budget by 20%. You might...
A 40,000 person company, and you cut the budget by 20%.
No, but this is like our own division.
Okay.
Whatever, we're having
What
these
division
meetings.
were you in?
This was called, it's a huge division. It was a systems operations division.
Who was in charge of that back then?
So this was way back then. It was Bob Hansen, George Hyder, amazing people. And like Bob Hansen taught me all about music, like all the different groups. He would make me tapes of different and give it to me. And his wife Paula used to work in marketing, and they had different last names. So one day I was saying something about Paula, and everybody was like this. And then later on they said, she's Bob's wife. I said, oh, she has different last names. And they said, yes, they do. So I was like,
that could get you into some real trouble.
I learned all these things. And George Hyder was the assistant general manager. Amazing guy. And they were all like friends. And
these guys back then weren't tools. I mean, they were actually sort of in it to do stuff. A lot of these companies, when they started out, were actually quite interesting. Like Apple,
like something like an Intel, everybody was smarter than you. And it was such an exciting place to work at. But the bottom line, what happened was I wasn't the best finance person because, again, I didn't love it. So I would go tell all the managers, hey, your budgets are going to be cut by 20%, so you pad them by 20%. So you will get what you want.
Get out.
Then my boss would be like, why'd you do that? I said, because it's unreasonable to just across the board cut 20%. So after a while, he said...
It's pretty gutsy for a 20-something-year-old to be telling your bosses this.
But this Nick Dieter was one of the best bosses I ever had. I mean, I had like all my life, had very good bosses.
You fell into a culture, which in my opinion was very evolved. Because when you go to those now, they're... I don't know, my son's had a great experience with Apple, and he's loved it.
Yeah.
But in some of the other companies I've heard about, what goes on, and
but
I think it's what you
even
make
Intel
it.
was a tough place, but I think I was very lucky because I was not that great in finance. I was almost at the borderline, we'll put you on 6-month probation, we are not sure you're good enough kind of situation. So Nick sat me down.
This is where the acting and theatrical background came in, right?
Yeah, I know.
You could work the crowd.
Yes. All of them loved me, but I wasn't good at my job. Then my boss sat me down and said, look, you did enough marketing in finance. You should actually go join marketing because you can't be, the popular, finance people are not popular people.
No.
So he's like, why don't you join
accountants,
marketing?
The guys who are the bean counters.
Yeah. So I'm like, oh, what is that? And so he helped me. He recommended me and moved me to
He wasn't
marketing.
just trying to get rid of you. He was trying to like
He
move
was
you
trying to
into
get
your-
rid of me, which he should. But he wanted to make sure I had a better place to
No,
land.
but he put you in a stronger position
Yeah.
where he looked at your aptitudes
Yeah.
and your ability, because marketing is all about positive energy and
Correct.
selling an item,
Yeah.
right?
So he said, why don't we move you there? And he helped me. And that's it. And then I loved being in marketing. And then I moved to California with that. So I was in Oregon.
To the Bay Area?
To the Bay Area. So it was the
interesting.
Intel headquarters
What year
was
was
in the Bay
that?
Area, 91.
Wow.
So in 89, I went just on a trip to California after the earthquake, the big earthquake. And I fell in love with California. So I went back and told my boss, I'm quitting Intel. I'm moving to California. I think I'll go to LA, become an actress. I'm moving. So I had a job offer from LA. And so he was like, no, you
In
can't.
tech or in acting?
No, it was in tech. But my boss said, look, you cannot leave
But 91
Intel.
for Intel was an interesting year because they
It
were
was an
producing all the
amazing year.
chips.
And also
for the
that's when,
IBMs.
so I'll tell you why I'm glad I stayed. And my boss said, don't leave. I will transfer you to California to headquarters. We'll pay for everything.
Wow.
And but don't leave Intel. So they moved me, and because California was more expensive than Oregon,
Give you a pay hike?
the pay hike plus they gave me a loan
All
to
for
be
like
able to buy a
padding
house.
20% and all of that. I love it. God, I don't get it. That's cool.
So no, I was in marketing for a couple of years. And what happened was when I came to Intel in California, that's when Intel Inside was introduced. So there was a new consumer marketing group that was never there. So what Intel did was they had this Intel Inside.
Yes, so the chip is inside the computer.
Correct.
I remember
Because
that.
we were
It had a
competing with
little at or
AMD,
whatever.
right?
Yes.
So it's a circle.
Yes.
So they went to all the OEMs and said, you put my logo, I will pay for your marketing.
Wow.
It was one of the most brilliant marketing campaigns. So I got to be like part of that and watch how it became. I mean, literally.
Whose idea was that?
It was like somebody in Japan tried something like Intel at it or in it or something like that. Then Dennis Carter, who was our CMO, brought that, and his team brought it. And we were trying to separate ourselves from AMD. Like, how do you have, because we lost the lawsuit where we said numbers can be trademarked. We had 386, 486,
Yes,
etc.
I remember that.
And they said you cannot trademark numbers, which was our biggest battle with AMD, because their things were also 386, 486.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So how do you differentiate yourself? So we said, let's do
Intel
this thing
Inside.
called Intel Inside.
Got it.
And so we had all this money. So we told all the OEMs that you put this on all your boxes, all your marketing. We'll do the channel marketing and we'll also market you. So it was one of the most brilliant campaigns. And I got to, like, you know, as a young person, you got to watch how they did it. So Intel did the motherboard, everything, and they gave it to OEMs and said, build boxes out of this. And then we spent on marketing that. So I carried like the first 6 laptops that were ever made in this world to a trade show. You know?
Amazing.
So it's like I got to see at Intel, you know, big companies, they have to invest so much in market development. That's the only way things evolve. If they don't pay, the people down the line have no money to
100%.
pay. So Intel, and then we got Intel to do software, and this is what Apple had, ISV groups,
Yeah.
independent software vendors. They would teach them how to program it to the computers and all that stuff. So we started those programs. Then I would go work with all the gamers to port their software to Intel architecture.
So, I mean, this was the big deal, right?
Yeah.
And with Jobs versus Bill Gates, Gates was just producing software, which would be powered by whatever box you wanted.
Correct, yeah.
And Jobs wanted an end-to-end solution
Correct.
where they controlled all of the real estate. And by doing that, his vision was that you would not have intruding thoughts. It would be pure,
Right.
And Jobs basically got pushed out of his company with Scully and all that, and then had to come back later. And the interesting part is later, Intel struck up a deal with Apple.
That's
to
much later.
Provide that. Much
Yeah.
later, after your time at
But
Apple.
the thing is, Andy Grove, Bill Gates, they were all in the open architecture camp.
Yeah.
So basically, PC is an open architecture. Any software can work
Yeah.
on it. whereas Jobs wanted end-to-end closed system. And actually, Jobs used to come meet Andy Grove regularly. Like, they would be eating lunch at the cafeteria, and like I would be like, let's get a table close by, like.
Just
and
to listen, to be a
and
fly on the
I
wall.
must say, I had such a crush on Steve Jobs. I cannot tell you. I even wrote a letter to him once saying
Get
why he
outta
should
here.
marry me. And I thought I'll go leave it at the front desk.
What year was this?
This was 93 or
Oh my
something like
God.
that. And
Did you ever meet him?
I met him. I mean, like in company meetings, like 30-second kind
guy?
of a thing. He was a tough guy, very tough.
You're
I
being
mean,
very
like,
diplomatic.
I mean, my team members who worked on that account would be like, oh my God, he's so difficult to work with.
I've heard horror stories.
But
I've read the books.
I've found most
he
of
was
brilliant,
driven, and
most
he
of
was
the
a
brilliant
genius.
people are very difficult to work with because they're. I mean, Andy Grove was not easy to work with. They had
Now,
like
tell me
tunnel
about
vision.
Andy. How did that happen?
See, Andy
You're on
is
this
like,
marketing team, and the next thing you know,
because I'm
you're
working
with
on
him.
all these. See, I always worked on things that were not product specific. They're like futuristic. So that is closest to the decision making. You know, like the CEO is always looking at new things.
So for
right?
those of you who don't know, Andy Groves was the CEO of Intel at one point.
Yeah.
And I think with him and Moore was the other
Gordon
guy.
Moore was there, and like. The thing is, when you're in the midst
Did
of
you meet
greatness,
Gordon as well?
Oh, I actually traveled with him. I worked on his talk.
Gordon
One talk
started the Moore's Law that
Moore's
every
Law.
18 months,
Yeah.
the chip
the
density
performance would
will
double.
go up and the performance would go up.
Yes. Yeah.
Now it's been surpassed.
Yeah, we broke the
because
Moore's Law.
the nanometer designs are going crazy,
right.
and the chip printing is going crazy.
Yeah, and there's so many new technologies,
Yeah.
materials, and all that. But Intel was like this. There's Gordon Moore,
So
who's
these were
like
the
the
giants.
granddaddy, and Andy Grove was like Times Man of the Year, and he's a immigrant.
So what did you learn
and
from them?
The biggest thing I learned from all of them is that, I mean, with Moore, it's a little different. He's such a humble person, you know.
So he's like the anti-Jobs.
Yeah, completely. I mean, it's like people wouldn't even know who he is. He drove an old car and extremely simple.
Did you meet Gates as well?
Yes, I mean, Gates in his young days. And so when, I mean, I must say one thing about Gordon Moore. Once I traveled with him, we went to Vienna together. He was doing a talk. So I was working with him on this talk. And he called me to his office. He says, the company rule says if it is less than 8 hours, whatever, 10 hours, it has to be economy ticket. But I want to go first class. So will you please give me the price of the economy ticket? So only that will be paid by Intel. The other will be paid by me personally. I'm like, who will question you? You know, this is like your company.
What a nice
but
guy.
But he was that strict, you know. And
it's a cultural thing.
And we went to Vienna, and he's like, I want to go for a walk. And I'm like, Gordon, can I send someone with you? No, I want to go on my own. And I'm like thinking, I'm responsible for this guy.
He didn't have
he's
a
like a market,
detailer
he's worth about $5 billion. If anything happens to him, it's on my head.
And nowadays,
and he's like,
it's ridiculous.
I'm going on my own. You know,
Yeah.
just very simple.
But do you think
people.
the threat assessment has changed?
In those days, we didn't have social media like here. Nobody knew what they looked like all over the place. I mean, in the scientific circles, Gordon was like God. And, you know, but otherwise, nobody knew who he was. So when you did a good job, Andy would send this, you know, a little note. It's a notepad that would have his name at the bottom. We all had at Intel notepads with our names at the bottom to send notes and all those things. So on his note, he would write 1 or 2 lines and just sign A and send it to you.
Very nice.
So that was an Andygram. So if you did a good job, you didn't get it all the time, like once in a lifetime.
Did it
like
come with a pay raise or a bonus or anything?
Nothing. Andygram was like better than any pay raise. It's sort of
Job
it's
security.
so rare. It's so rare that you had to have really done well to get an
got it.
Andygram. You know. So I just wanted to cut a little bit into the future and talk about Andygram and that particular why that Andygrams were so important. And cut to
How
many
long
years.
were you with Intel?
12 years.
My God. And how long were you working directly with Andy?
I never worked directly with Andy, but I always worked in groups that were doing things with him. Like when he went someplace to give a talk. Oh yeah, he knew who I was very well.
Indexation, in other words, you could maybe not walk into his office and ask for an appointment?
Yeah. That I could. I mean, like his assistant knew me, and
he was approachable?
Very approachable.
It sounds like Gordon was even more approachable.
They are all approachable, but you also didn't approach them unless there was a reason.
their
You really respected that approach. You don't want to just
hierarchy.
It's not even hierarchy. It's like they're such busy, brilliant people.
Sure.
You don't want to just
socialization.
Get a appointment just to get an appointment.
Got it.
And so it was understood. But Andy was always. I mean, Gordon, Andy, they all ate in the same cafeteria, so he could come join you at a table, and it wasn't like there's an executive lunchroom or anything. Everybody ate at the same place.
Which is interesting because I think the West Coast operated like that.
Yes.
The East
Only the
Coast was
technology companies operated like
absolutely.
that.
But even, I think you're right. My dad
Yeah.
was in an engineering company.
Right.
I don't think there was a hierarchy, but he had come from London, so he respected all of his bosses differently. But I think they all kind of ate together.
Yes.
And I think in startups, you and I have faced that
Yeah.
where our teams all ate together.
Correct. So there was no that's why for me, I never worked in anything other than technology companies. So I'm not used to where some people say, oh, I can't ask because, I'm not allowed to, or I cannot join this meeting because I'm not used to that at all. So it was a great place to grow up.
Inclusive culture.
Very inclusive, very tough culture. It is predominantly men still. I mean, in 90% of the meetings, even now it's a very predominantly men. It's many, many more.
But that's changing on campus.
It's changing.
When my kids go to school, 50% are women.
See, but that's a different thing of at the beginning of a company, they take men and women pretty much 50-50. By the time, 10, 15 years down the line when the top management thinks it's much less.
This is something we should circle back to because I think women face this in whatever profession.
Correct, yeah.
And it's changing, but not fast enough. Right. I think it should be a meritocracy.
Correct. It is a meritocracy. But a lot of women drop out. Anyway, it's a separate topic. I don't want to forget this Andy Graham
Okay,
thing.
so Andy Graham.
So Andy Graham. So fast forward many years, I have to give you a little bit of a background, is that when I was working at Intel, I was dating my husband who was at AMD. And Andy was very upset about it because Intel and AMD have this whatever.
And he knew about it, he'd done the research.
No, I mean, I introduced, this is my, I'm dating him, he's from AMD. I mean, we would have these small company gatherings where, Andy met him and he asked me, he said, like, how could you date somebody from AMD? I said, well, he's a good guy. So, but anyway, all this has happened and then Rajat left AMD, went to LSI, then Andy was like super happy. So this is now I'm talking something that happened in 94. We got married in 95. So this is something 94, 95. Fast forward almost 25 years. This may be 2011, 12, I can't quite remember the year. Andy Grove was giving a talk at Churchill Club for a fundraiser for an organization that actually rescued him from Hungary and brought him to US and stuff like that.
I didn't realize that he was an immigrant.
He was not just an immigrant.
He was orphan.
No, during Hitler's time,
what are you talking about?
His
Serious?
mother they ran away from Hungary and ended up in New York as refugees.
Wow.
And this organization brought the refugees and gave them a home.
That's a story.
Yeah. And actually, he wrote a book called Swimming Across, which is a beautiful book about his life, what happened. So then...
Was that his real name?
No, his name was not Andy Grove. It was different. Andres Groff or something like that.
You don't understand
yeah.
how this affects you
right.
until you're an immigrant.
Yeah.
I can tell you that
you
and I both sort of lived that story in different kind of settings, but the bottom line is it makes you hard.
Yes. To him, this was a privilege. You cannot waste this. Company is there to do work. There's no time for anything else. Like very, very sure. Like I remember in a company meeting, I asked him, would we ever have showers at work because we all go running in the afternoon and stuff. And he looked at me and says, you know what the answer is? I said, oh, he goes, bah! You know, it's like, I would never do it. And I was like mortified, in this town hall meeting in front of everybody. He's just told me. And 1 year later, Intel had showers because there was so much pressure from the employees. So then I subtly asked him, like, so what happened to that? He says, sometimes ridiculous things you have to do or something like that. He was still not very happy about having showers. Why should I spend money for showers at work, It was like, it's a waste of company money. So anyway, so this is in the early 90s, this AMD thing. Now you're talking 2011, 12. Now Andy had Parkinson's. So this was he was at a very advanced stage of Parkinson's. He couldn't sit still and all that stuff, but still this is one of the few public appearances he made to come to Churchill Club to talk about that organization that rescued him. So Ben Horowitz was with him, and he held him and he gave a talk. And I knew this was happening, and Rajat happened to be in US. By then we moved to India, but Rajat was in US. So I called him and said, I'm booking a ticket for you. You have to go to this event, and you have to go to Andy and tell him I said hello. Because by then he was not answering emails and all that stuff. And I also didn't want to write emails to him. So I booked this ticket. Rajat went there. And as Andy was coming in, and Rajat is like not somebody who fights the crowds to go talk to someone at all, but he promised me, so he had to do it. So he went and said, hi, Andy, my name is Rajat, and my wife Lakshmi used to work for you, and she wanted me to say hi. And this is in 2012 or something. Andy looks at him and says, AMD?
Wow.
Can you imagine?
Amazing.
And I am like not even a person who's his, direct. I was not a VP working with him or whatever. I worked on some projects with him. From 1994, he remembered in 2012.
Like a sieve, a sponge.
Like it's sort of AMD. And then he said, and by then he's shaking a lot. He couldn't, hold himself. But he asked someone to get a piece of paper, and he wrote like A, and he sent it. He gave it to Rajat and said, give it to Lakshmi. And I was like,
oh, over the moon.
Oh, I mean, over the moon, and also so touched, for someone like him.
But this is like a learning point.
Yeah.
You were asking me yesterday about some of this, and
right.
I said, what matters? It doesn't cost you anything.
Yeah. And that he remembered, and it was that one, I took a picture of it and put it in my Facebook and all that stuff. I was like, this is the best gift he could have given. That he remembered after all these years.
Amazing.
And just wrote an A and sent it to me. So after I left Intel, I was in venture capitalist, then I was in a nonprofit.
Which venture capital?
It was called Global Catalyst Partners. For a very short while I was there.
It's very good.
And then Kamran Ilahian was my partner, and did that for a bit, thinking I'll invest in India, and that didn't happen. So I went to a nonprofit. I worked in a nonprofit. And then I was like, that's enough, and I want to start something on my own. And I decided I'll start something called Lakshmi's Lounge and interview people. I had no idea what it meant.
What year was this?
2006.
Okay.
So that's when Andy's book was coming out.
Ah.
So I wrote to him, and I would keep writing to him once in a while and say, hey, can we have coffee? Once a year or so, or every other year I would go have coffee with him. So once I wrote to him, said, hey, Andy, do you think we can have dinner together? He wrote back to me saying, you're only coffee worthy.
You told me he was straight with you.
I loved it. I was laughing so hard. He was like, I will not spend an entire evening with you, but you're coffee worthy. I'm like, to Andy Grove, I'm coffee worthy. I'm happy about it.
Good enough for me.
So good enough for me. So I went to have coffee with him, and I don't even drink coffee, but I would go to have coffee with him. And then he was saying, what are you doing? So I said, I started this Lakshmi's Lounge. I don't know what it means. So he said, look, there's a book coming out in my name. I will only do one interview. Do you want to do it? And I was like, are you kidding me? Of course I want to do it. I had no company, no nothing. I'm like, I'm interviewing you. So I did an interview of him.
And you were married with?
I was married to Rajat already by then.
And you had your son?
No, not yet.
That was later.
This is much.
And so what did Rajat say of all this?
No, I mean, about me leaving and doing all this.
So why did you leave Intel? I'm going to ask you that.
So when I go back, I left Intel because I wanted to do something with India, but I just didn't know what.
Okay.
By then,
What
my
changed?
father passed away.
Okay.
And he was the one who always asked me, what are you doing to bring the biggest democracy, the richest democracy and the largest democracy together? He was a freedom fighter and all these things. And I also got married. And
I see that in you to some degree, that you've inherited some of those genes.
Yeah.
And the interesting part is kids learn by what they see.
Yes, yeah.
Not by what they're taught.
Yeah.
And clearly your father had those distinctions.
Yeah.
And he was bigger than just the label of a pediatrician or an MD.
Yeah. He loved politics and he loved India. And so he took me, he was a writer. So I would go to book openings with him. I would go to dance programs with him, doctors' conferences.
So this is making a little more sense now, as to where you are now and where the roots of that were sown.
Yeah. I mean, ever since I was a kid, like I have pictures of me in like pajamas, next to some minister at some book opening, something like that. So I went everywhere with him. And I learned a lot from him about all this, doing different things. But coming back to Andy, so when I said I'm doing this, he said he'd give me this interview. And Rajat always said, if you want to leave Intel, it's okay. You have my salary. So if you want to try something, try it now. Don't ever wonder what you could have done. So I felt I couldn't think of something new unless I left what I loved. I mean, I loved being at Intel. But if I was there, you can't do something else when you're doing something you love. So I said, I have to leave it.
And where was Intel at this point?
Intel was at the top of the game. This is 1999.
So this was an interesting comment on you. I mean, it's not an easy thing to leave at the height. I can tell you, my wife did the same.
Right.
I did the same, right?
Yeah.
And the thing is, it takes guts.
Yeah.
But it also takes self-reflection.
It takes guts, self-reflection, and a great support system also.
110%.
To have someone
and
like
Rajat is a sweetheart, by the way. We talk about this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
And it's just too much fun to hang out with. So I see the connection.
Yeah.
there.
So for him to say, do what you feel like doing now, So I left. I tried a bunch of things. I had a media company I started called Turi Media. I started interviewing people. I said, oh, this is a very expensive business. Then I went into venture capital. And I came to India because I wanted India to be like Israel. You invest in...
What year was that?
This is 2000.
Wow. Okay,
And
so that was very early in the
you
game.
invest and create product companies. We keep the IP, market it everywhere. But that's when service companies were really taking off. So no one wanted to do product companies, which is the right thing. But I was disheartened. I'm like, well, then, it's not like Israel. It's not like
I
developing
think you were
IP.
just too early.
I was a decade too early.
The 90s, exactly, the 90s and early 2000s, everything was service outside.
And it was the right thing to do.
And we didn't have a
time.
domestic market to really support the IP.
Right.
And that happened from 2011, 2012 onward.
Correct. So then I said, if I can't do this, I don't want to be a VC. So I would do something else with India. So I went off, partnered with my boss, Kamran, at that time. I did a program called Schools Online that put computers in really poor schools connected to the internet.
So not-for-profit.
Not-for-profit.
Cool.
But in year 2000.
In India or in the US?
In India. In India.
And
so
where
I came
in
to
India?
India, all across India.
And does it still exist?
Yeah. That program, we made it part of American India Foundation.
Wow.
It's huge program
AIF is
right
huge.
now. Yeah. So when I started with AIF, so then I made this program, grew it in 1 year, and I made this part of American India Foundation so it could grow on its own without me. And that was the idea. And even that, Schools Online, Kamran and I sat one day and said, let's do this in India.
I think we've done things with AIF before. If I'm not mistaken, was that the one with Hillary Clinton? And
Hillary came to speak there at time. Bill Clinton is
and
part
Bill
of,
Clinton is
there's a
part of
Clinton
that.
Fellowship and all that stuff. So he's a big supporter of that. So when I joined, before I joined AF, the schools online also started very suddenly because Kamran and I said, let's not do venture. I mean, he is a VC. I said, I don't want to do VC. I want to do something else. So let me see if I can do
That's
this
Global
in India.
Catalyst, you were
Yeah,
saying.
Global Catalyst. But he also had a non-profit thing called Schools Online, which was putting computers in really poor schools, connecting it to the internet. I said, let me do this in India. Let's see what it means. And we went to a conference and spoke about it. We both went out of the room. And I came back and Rajat says, where were you guys? Somebody just gave you $1 million. I was like, what?
Get out of here.
And I ran to this guy and then he said, I'm so impressed by your program. He was the CEO of Clarence Chandran, CEO of Nortel Networks. He said, we want to give you $1 million. And I was like, this was just an idea, you know. And now we got the money. And next day I flew and I said, give me the first check right now. $500,000. I got the money, came and started the program.
And this was in 2000?
2001. And not even 2001, 2000. So he gave this money and I ran next day to his headquarters, sat there, did all the paperwork, got the check, came, deposited it in Schools Online. And a big lesson I learned out of it is that a few months later, Clarence Chandran retired because he was unwell. And, many years before that, he was in a Nortel Networks work in Singapore and he was stabbed. He was staying in someone's house and he was stabbed. So that kept getting worse. And, as a COO, I was traveling everywhere and all that stuff. So his doctor said, look, it's either your job or your health. And he just quit.
Wow.
And the minute he quit, so obviously all the programs he was supporting, somebody else came, other things became important. If I didn't go and get that first $500,000 check, we wouldn't have had the money to start.
So that's a lesson for every entrepreneur out there.
Is that if someone promises, especially in the nonprofit sector, people promise and they forget because things happen,
But I'm telling you, all of us who have raised, who have tried to raise, whatnot, it's not a commitment with just a term sheet until that check hits your bank.
That check has to come. Everybody puts their hand up and says, I'll give. Till the money comes.
It's not done until it's done.
So I was like, I want to go get the check, deposit it, only then it's done. I mean, even now, that's my principle.
Congrats on that. That's not easy.
So we got, that Clarence's commitment is what started that program. And then Kamran put money into it and it became one of the largest programs. We made it part of American India Foundation. I felt, you always have to work yourself out of a job. Otherwise, you can't move. So I made it part of AIF. Then I became the head of fundraising for the entire organization, not just this one program. And we raised almost $30 million over 5 years. We did the first AIF Gala, AIF Summit. And we invented what it means to be a large NGO focused on India. And that was a great ride. And at the end of it, I said, I want to do something else. But I didn't know what. So for me, the theory is when you don't know what you want to do, you should quit what you're doing first and then do something else. And so I quit AIF.
And that's not always traditional logic.
It's not at all.
It's the bird in the hand sort of.
It's actually the same principle I'm not able to apply now, and I'll tell you in a second. So I left American India Foundation and took some time off, did this Lakshmi's Lounge and all that stuff. It led to something else. But when I was doing Lakshmi's Lounge, Andy Grove said, I'll give you an interview. I was ecstatic. So we booked an auditorium and there's so much to learn from him. I decided I wanted to do it at the Intel auditorium. So I booked the auditorium and all that. So because I said Intel is right there, everybody from Intel will come, all this stuff. So Andy called me and he said, do you want me to cancel my commitment to you? I'm like, why? He said, did you book this in the Intel auditorium? I said, yeah. He said, I will not have it in that auditorium because nobody should feel obliged to come to my interview. So if you do it in the Intel auditorium, count me out.
What a curious guy.
I was like, oh my God. I said, no, I'll get another auditorium. I will do it properly. I was like hyperventilating, And So we did it another thing, and then the day before the event, I get a message. This was the days of answering machines and stuff. I get this message: "Hello, Lakshmi. This is Andy Grove. I think I'm going to cancel tomorrow." And I go, and there's a beat. He says, just kidding. Just wanted to kid with you. I just wanted to tell you, after your interview, I arranged for a dinner with my family. I would love for you to join.
Wow.
I'm like,
you're dinner worthy now.
Yeah, now I'm dinner worthy. I was like, this is a terrible sense of humor, But I just want
You
to say.
said that to him, or you just thought?
Yeah,
it?
later on I told him, what the kind of a message is that? And I was like, very funny, very funny. I'm like, it's not funny. So in that interview, one of the questions I asked him was, if you were to grade yourself, what grade would you give yourself? And Andy is not a person with humility. He'll be like, I'm great. He'll say he's great. Now imagine, this is a company that went from first in 1988, had a first $1 billion quarter, to a $30 billion company in the 10 years that he managed it. And Intel Inside was a world-class brand, and the market cap went through the roof. He's a Times Man of the Year, author, survivor of cancer, all these things. He thought about it. He said, I'll give myself a B+.
Wow.
And I was shocked.
Surprise.
I said, why would you give yourself a B+? Now, he left in 97 or 98, something like that. This is 2006 or 7, so good 8-9 years afterwards. He said, I give myself a B+ because the true sign of a good CEO is he leaves the company to be successful 10 years after he left.
Yeah.
And I didn't do that.
They struggle.
I didn't have the vision to set up the future for Intel to be successful 10 years after I left.
Was that him or his successor?
It doesn't matter. His thing is, you need to pick the successor, you need to pick the plan, you need to do enough time in your regime that your company is capable of looking beyond what they're doing. He said, I didn't do that. That's why I give myself a B+. And it just blew me away of somebody being so critical. And it's a pity party or anything like that. It's like, I didn't do my job. That's it. And that became my model for what a great CEO is, that
the legacy
you
leave
have
behind.
to prepare the company for you not being there and be equally successful. That's the sign of a true CEO.
But do you think it's partly that the company can't be about you? It has to be an autonomous organization.
Of course. But it's like when you're a CEO for many years, the company is about you.
But that's the problem.
Right. But you need to set the processes in place with new people. Succession. It's a succession not just as a person, it's a way of
culture.
Thinking, how you need to look at new things. And he said that when we wanted to get out of DRAMs, we killed it and went to something new. We should have done similar things, So that clarity of thought
and I
is
think
really amazing.
You and I have discussed this, and we'll discuss it again at some point, that it was a company with so much promise, and yet now you find GPU companies and other companies prevailing. And honestly, that's a game which Intel played better than anyone else in the universe.
It shows that I think we missed the phone revolution. And it is singularly because of that, everything else. It's like, remember I was telling you.
But you weren't alone in that. Because
no, not
Motorola,
at all.
Nokia, all
Many
those guys
people
did.
missed it. So
Qualcomm,
it's sort of,
they survived and prospered. There were a few other companies which really prevailed. And now obviously with Jensen and his team at NVIDIA.
I remember in front of our eyes, Yahoo was born. Google was born. I remember seeing Sergey and Larry at their first presentation.
That's amazing.
And Rajiv Motwani and Asha Motwani, they are very close friends. Rajiv was the professor under which these two people studied. We saw Facebook being born. We saw NVIDIA being born. These are born in front of our eyes, And I mean, I think that is in some ways the cycle of a company, perhaps. Companies also have young age and adulthood, and
it's almost like a star.
Yeah, and unless you reinvent yourself, see, it's very interesting. So you have this 4 stages of life, right? and there's the your old age. At that time, you have to kill yourself
And be
to be born new.
Interesting.
Otherwise, you stay at that being old and become.
I think there's a lot of examples of that even now,
Right.
which are coming into play. And forget about market capitalizations. Think about ingenuity and sort of creation. And it's an interesting time in history. It's an interesting time in world stuff. So now you went from there. Now you spent some time with Chris.
Yes, I did.
Chris Anderson from TED.
Actually, the precursor to that is when I joined INKtalks.
This was from Lakshmi's Lounge days?
No, not that. 1993, when I started doing corporate business development. I worked for someone called Avram Miller, who's one of the most brilliant men I know. He looks like Einstein also. And so Avram took me to TED for the first time in 1993. And I felt
right at
like,
home.
This is what I want to do with my life. That there were people from every possible discipline there, brilliant people giving amazing talks. So Richard Saul Wurman was the one who started TED in 1983, actually.
Okay. Very interesting.
So and Avram Miller was there at the first TED in 1983. Then many years later, he did the other TED. And so he took me to TED in 93. Ever since then, I haven't missed a single TED till last year, I think.
Wow, I didn't know that.
So, and
now we're talking Vancouver or global?
It was in Monterey. TED for the longest time was in Monterey.
Much nicer.
Only 400 people. It's all nerds. I mean, nobody knew what TED was. And but it's like the same people. It was like a family. We all knew each other. And Richard was like a impresario. He sat on the stage and he worked with people on their talks. Brilliant, just brilliant man.
And I think it was thought leadership.
Yeah.
I mean, I've done my days with TED too, and been to a few of them. And I would say what impresses you is the people dream big and they execute. But you would never know it when you meet them. They're so humble.
Because you catch them at a time when they're not that big yet, right? I mean, that's what...
But even if they're big, you still meet them.
Correct, yeah.
Now it's a bit of a hustle fest, in my opinion. It's changed, the kind of culture.
Any organization, when it grows, it changes. So when Richard did it, only 400 or 500 people attended. It was in Monterey. He said, this is the dinner party I always wanted to have. And he's the one who coined the word TED. He said when
Technology,
the information...
entertainment, design.
Yeah, he said when information superhighway happens, when there's so much data, you need to organize it differently. The architecture of information superhighway...
This guy was so far ahead.
...will require technologists, entertainers, and designers. All the technologists are sitting in California. All the designers are in New York. All the entertainers are in LA. They should meet each other. That's how TED was born.
Wow.
And he was amazing at picking speakers and all that stuff. It was one of the most expensive conferences. If he didn't like you, you didn't get invited. If he liked you, you got invited. But Richard is brilliant. Even to this day, he keeps reinventing himself. Then Chris Anderson came to TED, and he was so moved, and he bought TED from Richard.
Bought it?
He bought it in 2001.
What did Chris do back then?
Chris, I think he had Business 2.0. He had a publishing company in England where he had a great exit. He came to US. He was trying to see what's my next gig. He was really touched by TED. And Richard by then has ran it for 10 years, was also more than 10 years.
A lot out of you.
Yeah, so he was like, maybe when this offer came, it was the right thing for both of them. And Chris took it a very new direction, he wanted to take it to more people. And for Richard, I want to influence the thought leaders. And for Chris, it was such an amazing thing it should be taken to many.
With everyone.
And both are right, and both are brilliant at what they do. So Chris bought TED, and actually initially he wanted to create a television show out of it. But it didn't lend itself to television. And so somehow then internet happened and all these things. In 2007, TED was, 2007, 8, something like that, TED.com started. And they were experimenting with it, you know. And so they did TED Africa by then, TED Oxford. So I always wanted to host a TED ever since 1993, right?
Yep.
When I first saw the TED.
Yep.
So I went to Chris and said, why don't we host TED in India? None of us thought what it means, at least I didn't think what it means. But Chris, in all his, magnanimity, he said, okay. I had no track record or anything, but he said, you're a trusted member of the tribe. You've been coming to TED, you know what it means. So let's see if it'll work. So anyway, there was a 2-year process and stuff. So we hosted the only TED that happened in Asia, happened in India in 2009. So that really, doing TED here really opened my eyes to the need for Indians to tell their stories in their own voices. And TED gave an amazing platform to all the talks we had here. So I felt this is really what I want to do. I want to move to India and I want to work with people to tell their stories, because we Indians don't know how to tell our stories. And we have not been taught how to talk about ourselves in a way that's appealing. In our schools don't teach us articulation, writing, and things like that. And I met in my nonprofit world, otherwise, so many people
Talented, gifted
who were
people.
so
No
great, but
shortage.
we didn't know their stories.
Yep.
So that became my mission with INK, that INK stands for innovation and knowledge. So if we want to become an innovative country.
And what year was that?
2010.
Okay.
So if we want to be an innovative country, we need to expose people to different things.
2009 is when you brought the first
TED India.
to India.
We did TED India.
And that was in Pune?
No, it was in Mysore. At the Infosys campus in Mysore.
Okay.
2009 was TED. 2010 we launched INK in India.
Okay.
And I just want to say that when I launched it, I thought, oh, everybody will know about this and it, will be successful in a year. I just want to say a little bit about an entrepreneurial journey, is that it takes 10 years to really know which direction you need to go, because the world is changing, you're changing, India forces you to do things differently, and nobody wants to pay for anything here. Everybody wants everything for free. So you have to think of different business models here. And there are so many people who trusted and put money in this, which I couldn't even pay them back. And they just went with it because everybody believed this must happen in India, that the stories from here should be told across the globe in our own voices. It's happening now, but this was a different ball game in 2009, in 2010.
Now there's no shortage of conferences.
Yeah. But the focus is really on being authentic, telling your story. So now we feel for 10 years we did it. There are 10 different talk companies now. And the next journey I'm looking forward to is to how you turn talks into action. So a talk is inspiring, but what do you do with it?
Execution.
So how do you take some amazing ideas?
Would you do that through a VC or PE, or would you?
So actually the way we are doing it right now is that we have a foundation. So we incubate ideas in that foundation and see which one succeeds and spin it out.
Interesting.
So we have a fellows program that will forever stay in the foundation, And so we pick 20 amazing people from different disciplines, we bring them together.
I think it's the right approach.
Yeah.
Is it not for profit?
And that's not for profit. We tried another one called Writers Inc., which is teaching people how to write.
Yeah, the
so
Writers
that we've tested it for three things, and we got a funding to test it. It's very much a need in India, so we'll probably spin it out. Okay. And so another one we are doing is called INK Women, with all this AI and things like that. We need more representative data, more women's voices online. We are experimenting with it. We have a speakers bureau for women and all that. We are experimenting. So we said now the thing is, how do you take big ideas and have an amazing talk about it, about how you can make an idea a reality and work with it to make that idea a reality. So it's not just a conference for us anymore. As I said, you have to die one thing before you start another thing. So the conference, talks, all those are great. But how will they help move things forward? I'm sure many people think they're crazy, but they are important for India. Yeah.
Lakshmi, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Yeah.
And we've covered so many topics, and this lens for another
Yes.
nice evening.
This started with, let me come
wine.
hang out with you at home through an interview.
And
So-
that's how many of our
Yes.
conversations,
Yes,
start, and then it ends up becoming something. This is what happened last year and the
Right.
year before, and in 2013. And the friendships we've developed between you and I and all of the other people in the community have been amazing for all of us.
Yeah.
I look forward to seeing continued success.
And
from
I
you.
must say that both you and Madhuri are really, I think you're using your fame, your presence for getting important messages out there. And your money and your fame is as good as it serves others. Other than that, you will not take it to your grave. So I'm really excited about all the things you both are doing and
that's
how,
very
especially you have been such a pillar in all this. It's not easy what you're doing. And so I really love it.
I think it's very genuine.
Yeah.
Even for me, I see you and what you've done in your journey.
Yeah.
And not a simple journey. And I learned a lot today from you about how you got there. And I think the audience will also learn a lot from hearing about your travels.
Yeah.
I wish you all the best for
Thank you.
future successes. And I'm certain that our paths will intersect multiple more times on this journey. And I think we share a mindset of paying forward, doing good things for good people, and building a culture.
And we both owe it to Vishal Gondal for introducing us to each other.
I know.
Yes.
Crazy Vishal.
Yes.
You're out there somewhere.
Yeah, and really big thanks to him. He was one of our first supporters. This wouldn't have happened.
But I think there's such a vibrant community of people.
Yes.
And we all share roots, and the kinds of people we've met together.
Yeah.
And separately have been interesting, and they always come home and stay with me and you, and so it's a very cool feeling, and it's not the corporate kind of stuff. So I enjoy it.
Yes.
But thank you very much for joining us, and I'm looking forward to doing great things together.
Definitely.
And,
Definitely.
We'll have you on this, and I'm hoping you guys have enjoyed everything you've heard today, because we're gonna kind of bring this together, because there's some amazing stories in the days of giants, and one sitting with me here. And so I want all of your comments in the comments below. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share, and hit the bell icon, and make sure you support Lakshmi and
INKtalks.com.
Yes.
But all the young people go read about Andy Grove as well.
100%. And not just Andy, but think about yourselves through her eyes, because the kind of stuff she's done are quite interesting, and also some of the anecdotes. But we've enjoyed it immensely, and I look forward to hearing your comments in the section below and having more interviews with such incredible people. And other than that, thank you for joining us. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.